There's no surprise today that we're living in a very complicated world, and especially we continue to see how social media continue to dominate the lives, especially among the younger generations. Now, if you remember that for so long we've been talking about the power of social media in terms of relationships and also how the younger generations are using social media to seek information. But we're living in the age where information today, it's really hard to be validated. Again, because we have all kinds of resources and also the way that how younger generations, especially in Asia, are receiving information. And some of the informations are critical, especially when you look at politics or economic agenda. But other informations on social media can be really harmful, and when we look at this geopolitical change. Now, how do we understand that? And why today is crucial? And some experts propose that it's time that we need to bring media literacy back on the table, especially we're seeing the effectiveness of education. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is the Professor Douglas Montgomery. Professor Montgomery is a CEO of Global Connects Media, and he's an adjunct professor at Temple University, Japan. Well, Professor Montgomery, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, again, Professor, it's such an honor to have you on our show. Now, again, as I mentioned before, initially when I discovered you because of this amazing article that you wrote, which is entitled Teaching Media Literacy is the Starting Point for Resisting Fake News. Now, we know that today, especially we talk about the younger generations in Asia, I mean, across the world, that social media platforms are expanding and has been critical and crucial for their parts. But from your perspective, why is it even more significant for us to teach them about media literacy, and how is that playing out based on where you are right now? Your thoughts?
Well, I think, one advantage I have of being an adjunct professor at Temple University is, I have access to, younger people. So I've been teaching that class for a couple of years. I also have my own son. He's 18, so he's kind of in the target group as well. I see what the students they bring to class, depending on whatever assignments we give them, and it becomes very obvious where they get their news, right? Because I'm teaching communication. If I give them a topic, pick some. I'll give an example. I said. Pick some speaker that you find does a very good job, and critique what they speak. And it's fine if somebody, in my opinion, it's fine if somebody picks Obama or like that. But there's others who pick Andrew Tate, right? And they pick Andrew Tate, and they make an argument on why they think Andrew Tate's a good speaker. And I'm like, okay, the original assignment was, can Andrew Tate persuade in the spirit of Aristotle and ethos, pathos, and logos. But then it also, I'm thinking, that's fine if he does a good job of persuading, but the information that's coming out of this particular individual, is just crap. And this is kind of what was scaring me. Like, this is like dripping into their brain, right? Again, I don't find him a credible source. I mean, I think he's in jail right now, so I think that's pretty obvious. But this became a concern that I saw from my class.
Well, again, Professor, based on your observation, again, I want to go back to the article. Again, you mentioned that today we're living in this age that younger generations solely depend on social medias. I mean, it could be one of the ways for them to acquire or seek information. But you mentioned that when we talk about this regional vulnerability, it's what you called insufficient teaching. I mean, again, I think if we look back to the past couple of years in the U.S., that misinformation or fake news, I mean, had always been this dominant headlines for the news, and when we talk about, but in terms of the nation of Japan and South Korea, again, why is that so concerning at this moment, in addition to what you observed from your own son, but in this bigger scale, what role do the social media platforms play, and also why is that concerning in a bigger scale?
Well, I think, from the article and some of the research I did, there was a study that was done by Reuters, and they came back with, different regions of the world talking where people get their news. And, the kind of extreme example was people in the Nordic countries, kind of get the news from direct sources. Whereas in Japan and Korea, they get them from aggregated sources, right? So, through things like Naver or Line or whatever. And, every time I think you put in a filter or a buffer between, the source of the news and what you read, there can be a problem. I think and even now, if you go to, let's say a well-known longtime news source like ABC News or NHK or whatever, there's a certain amount of trust built into that, particularly when you go to them directly. When you're getting your feed and the NHK or ABC News link is just one of many, it kind of, if you click through it and you read the news there, I mean, I suppose that's fine. But in an aggregated system, number one, you didn't choose, the aggregator chose, your news source. So you've already lost, some control. And then number two, if you're, let's say, a credible news source, but you're listed with a bunch of, BS news sources, you're kind of delegitimized by just being in the same, filter as the others. And I think that's a huge problem.
I want to go back to the data that you mentioned in the article. This is pretty profound. That in South Korea, only 6% access news directly from the news organization, with 67% rely on, as you called, aggregators. And Japan shows nearly identical pattern. Only 9% go directly, while 70% depend on aggregators such as Yahoo Japan, Line, and News. I mean, today when we look at the news field or journalistic field in the U.S., I have to say that sadly speaking, a lot of news organizations lost the credibility, regarding the content creation, of course, with the AI production as well. But in countries such as Japan and South Korea, again, feel the temperature, Professor. How do people, especially the younger generations, feel about the news? So in other words, how often are they watching it? Again, it's not just about the political perspective and also from the social, cultural engagement, because we have to really step out the comfort zone. I don't want to talk about politics when I hear the word news. I really want to know that what else is going on within the country and something more fascinating or perhaps even a new discovery. But again, we're seeing different audience, and the younger generations are not looking for the traditional way. They're looking for something new, something innovative. So what is the temperature? What is the climate of the news in South Korea and Japan? Your thoughts?
I think there's a lot in there, so I'll kind of go piece by piece. I'll start at the back first. I think actually, the fact that, this generation, right? They're called digital natives. They've been on the internet their entire lives because the internet's been around their entire lives. They're typically getting cell phones around 10 years old, a little young. So they're really tethered to the internet, and that it's 24/7, right? Something's coming at you all the time, 24/7. We know that. So on the one hand, I think actually, getting your news from that is actually not so bad. Again, my generation is very different. Back, I'm an older guy, right? So when I was younger, there were 3 channels and, usually one TV in the household. So if it's 6 o'clock and the mom and the dad wanted to watch the news, the whole family watched the news, right? Because that was it. You had no other option. So since those days are gone, I think the fact that, kids now are getting their news through social media is better than not getting the news. That's for sure. So I think that actually can be looked at as at least, some kind of positive thing. But the second one that I think is, kind of why there's such a big difference between, let's say, the West and East, and in this example was the Nordics versus Asia. I think Professor Sawa from Waseda mentioned it best, and I attended that news conference personally. I was sitting right in front of his face. I actually asked the question, but anyway. And that was his answer. His answer is, Asian kids, he said Japanese kids, but I think it applies to Asian kids. they are not taught to question, they are taught to listen, right? And, I've lived in Asia now for almost half my life, and I can see the difference. Like, Western kids are taught to ask questions, and they do. They stick up their hand, they interrupt teachers, they interrupt professors, and, Western professors and teachers, they're kind of used to it, where you don't do that in Asia. And, if you're not used to asking questions and just trusting what is given to you, that's a big problem. So you're getting news all day long through these social media sites or whatever. As I said, there could be good in that as well. But you definitely can't take it at face value, right? You got to dig in. Like, is this true? What is the source? What are they getting at? What do they want from me? And I don't think Asians are used to it.
And what about the schools? I mean, again, we know that education today is standing at the crossroads, regardless where you live. And especially right now, we talk about this explosion or the continuation of the information explosion under the impact or the development of AI. So, Professor, from your perspective, as you mentioned before, that kids today, they are looking for information, but most of them, they're not using ways to validating or to identifying, the misinformation or the fake news. So how do you think that AI today, or how do you think that we're living in the age of AI, can be a motivator or can be a strong factor that push the younger generations to say, hey, when you watch something, when you read something, you need to verify or you need to understand that content is not produced by the human effort. It's actually by the machine, or it can be by the third party, etc. So how do you think that we're dealing with that regarding the information verification at this moment?
So this is a really tricky topic, right? Because, you have all these, I'm involved in the university, and you have all these debates going on, how much AI should be used in the classroom. And you got a bunch of purists who say, like, it should never be used, and, blah, blah, blah. And you have others who are much more practical and say, well, it is going to be used. So how do we deal with it? That's one thing. Number two, speak at a different university, but I was there over the summer, and, I was talking to the career people in the MBA program, and they said it best. They said, look, we have companies coming to us saying, which of your MBA graduates are the best at using AI? So, the market, commerce, companies want people who can use AI because AI is so efficient. So if I look at that, I'm like, okay, there's a few points going on, but if companies are hiring people who are good at using AI, then we better be teaching them how to use it effectively, as opposed to, trying to, put your finger in the dike and stop the water. That is my view. So then, the next step is, what do you do? And I think you said it best. They need to be taught how to verify, right? And, okay, I've been in the media business for 25 years, and I can ask, ChatGPT or Claude a question and get an answer. And it's faster than, going to Google or looking it up in a textbook myself. But I also have enough experience to know if it's right or wrong. In general, not every time. The younger you are, the less experience you have, so the less, ability you have to recognize an incorrect answer. Therefore, the need to, dig in and verify is even greater. So to ask, students to write a paper, hey, that's fine. If they use AI, they're going to do it anyway. But, they got to source everything, right? What is your source? And then, then you got to dig into that source. Like, okay, you wrote a source. Was it Wikipedia? Wikipedia is a BS source. What was your source? Was it ABC News? Okay. Then, if you want to go even further, who at ABC News? Is that a trustworthy person? You can you can dig forever. I mean, I think there's a point where you would, that actually doesn't become practical. But at this point in time, I think, demanding your students, you need to give me the sources, is one way to deal with it.
Professor, let's talk about another crucial aspect. It's about the AI regulation. And we know that today it's a never-ending topic. I want to go back to the article. This is something that you wrote that, again, significantly data that 89% of responders call for increased government regulation to combat AI-generated disinformation, and 86 expressed concern about artificial intelligence potential to manipulate public opinion. In the nation of Japan, I mean, again, this is where you are teaching and based. What about the AI regulation for the country? Again, if I'm not mistaken, that last year, this newly formed government, again, under the newly elected prime minister, that she's very, very critical towards this technological advancement, and also she pays a lot more attention about, domestic policies and international affairs. But so far, we have not heard so much information about her take or her role on this AI regulation, especially linked to education, especially linked on the daily basis. So, from your perspective, what is the solution? Or I'm not even asking for the solution, but
Sure.
what is the procedure for the AI regulation, especially in education in Japan today? I mean, again, if we don't put regulations or policies on it, what's the next for the youth? What's the next for the education for the younger generations? What do you say to that?
So again, there's a lot in there. One, the Japanese government needs to become stable because they've been having a bunch of new leaders over the last couple of years, which doesn't help to create any kind of landmark regulation. So we'll see, right? We'll see if she wins the next election. She's likely to win, and then potentially we can see her real opinion. Any politician's opinion right before an election is usually geared to getting votes, as opposed to any kind of meaningful legislation. However, at the same time, this is kind of why I'm pushing that we need to teach it in the class and do a bit of a more of a grassroots approach. Excuse me, because you can't count on government to do this, right? I mean, or we can't yet. I mean, hopefully we'll be wrong, but look at what happened in the U.S. with the platforms in Section 230. Section 230 came out in the late 90s, and was, I suppose, relatively harmless at the time, basically saying the platforms weren't responsible for the content on their websites. And I suppose it was fine when the platforms were small, but now that they're massive, the secondary effects on this were not anticipated in 1997. Now, AI regulation is probably at the same point in time where there is really no precedent to look at it. So the precedents are being set today. I don't see those precedents being set in Japan. I see them being set in the U.S. or potentially even Europe. So I think if meaningful legislation regarding AI use, copyright law, and these things happens in the U.S. or Europe, I see that probably coming to Japan and Korea as opposed to it being created here.
Well, Professor, I have two more questions before letting you go. Let's talk about,
Excuse me.
towards the end of the article, this is something that you wrote, and I quote, "Importantly, media literacy should be framed as a core civic competency, not a niche digital skill. In the algorithmic era, the ability to evaluate information is as fundamental as reading comprehension was in the print age." Let's talk about the reality, Professor. Kids are not reading books these days. I mean, this has been a major concern across the spectrum. But one thing quite stunning to me that you wrote, media literacy should be framed as a core civic competency. What does that mean, and why is that critical?
Well, as a member of society, you're responsible for the direction it goes, right? That's kind of one of the core things of a democracy. And therefore, without spending all this time talking about how we're being manipulated by this and that, again, everybody knows. That's kind of the point, right? Like, this isn't new, like, oh, hey, students, you realize that Facebook's trying to trick you on something? Yeah, they already know. They know. 100% they know. So where do you go from there? I think this is the point. Like, you need to teach people, people should vote, right? This is a democracy. You can't complain if you don't vote. You should vote. And then with that vote, you should vote, smartly. And to vote smartly, the onus is upon you as the voter, as a member of society, to, dig in and figure out, is this information true or not? And I think it's, really that simple. And, again, to go back to the class, all the kids know they're being manipulated. I think most adults realize it as well. But are they making the effort? And it is an effort, right? It is an effort to click on something like, I don't think that's right. Is that correct? And spending some time with Google or whoever and digging into it. I mean, that's extra work. And, if you want to live in a society where, we, agree on what a fact is, people need to start doing that more than just, living with what's fed with them in their echo chamber. So the other point that I was trying to make behind that is, this idea actually came out of event that we had at the Foreign Correspondents Club in Japan. It was originally framed about how, journalism's under attack and this and that. And, my thought was, okay, it would be fine to teach media literacy in a journalism course. But, the kids need to know media literacy in their economics course. The kids need to know media literacy in their communications course. The kids need to know media literacy in all their courses because it's relevant for everything, not just journalism, because they're all getting the information from the same sources, the platforms. So if you don't know how to, dig into those sources and figure out the legitimacy of the information, we got a problem.
Well, Professor, I want to end our conversation by asking you the last question. Again, sure. I am a father of 2 kids. The daughter is 5 and my boy is 2.5. And again, there's no surprise that today, both of my children, they don't have their phones. But right before going to bed, or sometimes when we're busy, and they're used to the culture that, hey, phones or content on the phones can be rather entertaining and at least can really free the adults for a while. Also, you mentioned the article, according to the Mobile Society Research Institute survey, that 2024 found Japanese children now receive their first smartphones at the average of 10.3 years in South Korea. The Ministry of Gender Equality and Family Survey found that 50% of children aged 10 to 19 were over-dependent on smartphones. Professor, where's the hope? I mean, again, I know that I'm preaching to the choir, and also you have been asking this question over and over again. As a father, I am very much terrified if I know my 2 young kids stay on their phone for so long. I know even for adults, sometimes that we can't even get rid of the habit or air quote addiction of spending too much time on the phones. But since we're talking about the misinformation, we're talking about the fake news and etc., but it's time for us to do something to educate the younger kids and to prevent them from becoming addictive to the phones. So to you, what do you say to that? And how can we find hope in terms of solving this problem collectively? Your final thoughts?
Well, so the point that I would give you that is hope is, again, I have the benefit of teaching a bunch of kids, 18, 19, 20 years old. And once again, they know, right? They know the information on the internet is very, suspect. They know they spend too much time on the phone. They know, right? So that's that doesn't mean everything's fine and it's all going to be great. No, that does not mean that at all. But I'm just giving you, one beacon of hope. They know. They absolutely know. They all know. I have an 18-year-old son. We have a fight over the phone 4 times a week. He knows, right? They know. So, by kind of beginning to teach them the benefits and the detriments of the phone, of information on the phone at a young age, hopefully we can, start combating, these, detrimental effects. Second of all, I think, this generation that's probably come up from, again, my son's age, so like the last 20 years, as far as I can see, they were not really taught media literacy or, really the detriments of the phone. It was just more like, anyway, they weren't taught it. But maybe the next generation Alpha or whatever, if we can start working on them earlier, perhaps, we can have a different outcome. Look at cigarette smoking. Cigarette smoking, very common when I was, 16, 17 years old. Now, not so much. That's probably a 20, 30-year process of, teaching people the bad points of smoking. I'm from Canada originally. Canadians actually put a picture of a diseased lung right on the pack, right on the cigarette pack. It's actually quite big. It's also quite disgusting. But, that wasn't around, when I was 16 years old, right? So all these little things actually, I think, can have a big effect, but it does take time and it needs to be consistent. And, when's the best time to start in life? 1 year ago. When's the second best time? Today. So we can start today, right? By teaching these kids media literacy.
Well, that's it. With that, note of hope. Again, it's not too late to teach the kids regarding media literacy, and as long as they can identify and understand the information that they're receiving or being fed on a daily basis. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Professor Douglas Montgomery. Again, Professor Montgomery is the CEO of Global Connects Media, and he's an adjunct professor at Temple University, Japan. And I strongly encourage everyone go online to check out this amazing article. Teaching media literacy is the starting point for resisting fake news. Well, Professor Montgomery, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to discuss those global affairs. So thank you so much for doing this.